Welcome back, dear students. Currently, we are learning about the second chapter, banking institutions. In this third session, we will concentrate on various types of scheduled and non-scheduled banks. The structure of banking sector in India. Once we are able to understand this overall structure of the banking sector, then we can understand the role of scheduled and non-scheduled banks. In India, banks are classified into commercial banks and cooperative banks. Commercial banks will comprise of scheduled banks and non-scheduled commercial banks. The scheduled commercial banks are further classified into private and public banks, foreign banks, and regional rural banks, and also the cooperative banks, which include the urban and rural cooperative banks. The initial days of the industry of banks, it saw a majority private ownership and a highly volatile work environment. So major strides towards the public ownership and accountability were made with nationalization in 1969 and 1980, which transformed the face of banking in India. The industry in recent times has organized the importance of private and foreign players in a competitive scenario and has moved towards the greater liberalization. So this is a outlay of various banks which are accommodated in the structure of Indian banking system. So scheduled and non-scheduled. Scheduled will further be classified into commercial and cooperative banks. Cooperative banks are classified further into state cooperative, district cooperative, and other cooperative banks. Whereas the commercial banks are further divided into public sector banks, private sector banks, foreign banks, and regional rural banks, which again the public sector banks are further divided into SBI and associate banks, nationalized banks, and other public sector banks. The entire evolution of the banking sector can be classified into four distinct phases. Phase 1, regarded as pre-nationalization phase prior to 1955. Phase 2, era of nationalization and consolidation, which took place between 1955 to 1990. Phase 3, introduction of Indian financial and banking sector reforms and partial liberalization, which took place between 1990 to 2004. Phase 4, the period of increased liberalization, which happened from 2004 onwards. Then the organization structure of banking sector. So firstly, the Reserve Bank of India, which is also called as the central bank of our country or the apex bank of our country. It was established on 1st April 1935 in accordance with the provisions of Reserve Bank of India Act of 1934. Since it holds the apex position in the banking structure, it performs various developmental and promotional functions. It is given wide powers to supervise and control the banking structure. In many countries, central bank is known by different names. Then the commercial banks. Commercial bank is an institution that accepts deposits, makes business loans, and offers related services to various functions like accepting deposits, lending loans, and advances to general customers and businessmen. These institutions run to make profit. They also cater to various financial requirements of industries and other sectors like agriculture, rural development, etc. Then the public sector banks. Currently, there are 21 nationalized banks in India. The public sector bank accounts for 75% of the total banking business in India, and State Bank of India is the largest commercial bank in terms of volume of all commercial banks. So some of the national banks, nationalized banks in India are Allahabad, Andhra Bank, Bank of India, Bank of Baroda, Bank of Maharashtra, Canara Bank, etc. Then the private sector banks. The private sector banks in India represent part of the Indian banking sector that is made up of both private and public sector banks. The private sector banks are banks where the greater parts of stake or equity are held by private shareholders and not by government. Some of the private sector banks which are topping the industry are Axis Bank, Bank of Punjab, Centurion Bank, Development Credit Bank, and so on. Then the foreign banks. A foreign bank with the obligation of following the regulations of both its home and its host countries. Loan limits for these banks are based on the capital of the parent bank, thus allowing foreign banks to provide more loans other than subsidiary banks. Foreign banks are those banks which have their head offices abroad. For example, Citibank, HSBC, Standard Chartered, and so on. Currently, India has 36 foreign banks. Then, last but one, regional rural banks. The government of India set up the regional rural banks on 2nd October 1975. These banks provide credit to the weaker sections of the rural areas, particularly the small and marginal farmers, agricultural laborers, and small entrepreneurs. There are 82 RRBs in the country. NABARD holds the apex position in the agricultural and rural development. Then the cooperative banks. The cooperative bank was set up by passing a Cooperative Act in 1904. They are organized and managed on the principle of cooperation and mutual fund. The main objective of cooperative bank is to provide rural credit. The cooperative banks in India play an important role even today in rural cooperative financing. The enactment of Cooperative Credit Societies Act 1904, however, gave the real impetus to the movement. The Cooperative Credit Societies Act 1904 was amended in 1912 with a view to broad-basing it to enable organization of non-credit societies. Some of the examples of cooperative banks in India are Andhra Pradesh State Cooperative Bank Limited, the Bihar State Cooperative Bank Limited, Chhattisgarh Rajya Sahakari Bank Maryadit, and so on. This was about the banking structure, which spoke about both the scheduled and non-scheduled banks. Thank you, dear students. We will meet again in the next session. Take care. Bye.